Chapter 5. The Inquiry, Who Am I? And the Four Yogas. This very process of thus separating ourselves from these sheaths, which are extraneous and alien to us, has been described in scriptures, shastras, as yoga, though in its strictest sense the word yoga simply means union. Our earlier analysis has led us to call this process one of separation. In effect, however, these two, separation and union, are one and the same. What in Bhagavan Ramana's path to happiness has been so far described as a separation from what we are not, is the same as that which has been called by all shastras, which have prevailed in our midst up until now, as union with God. If so, what is the reason for the use of these two contradictory words? The basic meaning which Sri Ramana, the Lokamaha Guru, gives us for the word I is our true natural consciousness, self, Atma Bhava, whereas the basic meaning which has been given by the Shastras up until now for the word I is the consciousness I am this body, Jiva Bhava. Let us make this clear with an example. Suppose one man says, I have come to Tiruvannamalai, and another says, I have gone to Tiruvannamalai. Both are pointing out the same event of reaching Tiruvannamalai. What do we infer from their way of pointing out that same event of reaching Tiruvannamalai with the contradictory words, come and gone? Is it not evident that the first one is in Tiruvannamalai, while the other one is not in Tiruvannamalai, but is speaking from somewhere else? Similarly, the method which is given to an aspirant who asks for a path to perfect happiness will be described either as separation, the yoga, or as union, yoga, according to what is given to him or taken by him as the basic meaning for the word I. There is thus a difference between the yoga which has been taught by the Shastras and the self-enquiry taught by Sri Bhagavan. Accepting the wrong understanding of ordinary people, I am this body, I am a separate existence, as the base, the Shastras teach the four yogas, namely Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Raja Yoga, and Jnana Yoga. 1. Act without attachment to the fruit thereof, says Karma Yoga. 2. Do not love any other thing, love God alone, says Bhakti Yoga. 3. By separating yourself from God, you have degraded yourself into a petty individual soul, Jiva. Go and unite with him again, says Raja Yoga. 4. Know God, says Jnana Yoga. In each of these four yogas, there must be an I to do action without attachment to the fruit thereof, an I to love God, an I that separated itself from God, and that must now go back and unite with Him, and an I which was so far ignorant of God, and which is now trying to know Him. Thus, in all these four yogas, the individual existence of an I in the form of an I am this or I am so-and-so is indispensable. Without this I, no yoga can be performed. Then is it not necessary first of all to find out who is this I? Does he actually exist? Does he have a separate existence? Is he real? Instead of frittering away one's energy in attempting to attain the must-cherished Godhood through the four yogas, it would be easier, more important, and also best to know oneself first, by scrutinizing, who am I? What is my true nature or existence? Until and unless a doubt-free knowledge of oneself is obtained, however much one may know about God by reading about Him, hearing about Him, or seeing visions of Him, doubts and miseries will be rising in one again and again, because there is an I. It is only after accepting the conception that this I, who is to perform the 4 yogas, is a separate entity, that the Shastras have given us the teachings on them. But Bhagavan Sri Ramana does not at all allow us to accept this conception. Before opening your coffers and finding your assets, do not begin to wail unnecessarily, proclaiming, I am a penniless beggar. First, set about to open your box. Then only after seeing can you speak about it. Similarly, before you inquire and know who you really are, do not unnecessarily make the wrong estimate about yourself, that you are a limited, petty, individual soul, jiva. First, set about to inquire and know yourself. And after knowing yourself, if you are still in need of anything, God, liberation, happiness, etc., let us look to it then, advises Sri Bhagavan. The I am the body consciousness, Dehatma Buddhi, is the individual soul, jiva. In other words, the nature of the individual soul is nothing but the wrong knowledge, I am the body. Though this insentient body cannot say I, i.e. does not have the feeling I, and though existence consciousness, Sat-Chit, self, has no rising and setting, between these two rises an I of the measure of the body, the I am the body identification. Know this alone to be the knot between consciousness and the insentient Chit, Jada, Granti, bondage, bandham, soul, jiva, subtle body, sukshma, sarira, ego, shankara. This mundane state of activities, samsara, mind, manas, and so on. Uladu Narpardu, verse 24. This I am the body, consciousness, arises after sleep, exists and remains active till sleep, and again subsides in sleep. Since the body is insentient, it has no I consciousness. Hence this consciousness which rises as I am the body cannot be said to be the body. Can we then call it self, Atman, since it is an I consciousness? No, we cannot, for rising and setting is not the nature of self. The nature of self is existence consciousness, Sat-Chit, shining ever, as I am without rising and setting. Thus, this consciousness I am the body which has a rising and a setting cannot be said to be self either. It is neither self, which is consciousness, nor the body which is insentient. It is a ghost-like false appearance, taking the size of the body as its own size, being limited by time and space, being a mixture of the quality of the body, i.e., rising and setting, and the quality of self, i.e., shining, as an I consciousness, but at the same time alien to both of them, and rising as a knot, Granti, between self, Chit, and the insentient body, Jada, Chit, Jara Granti. This is the ego, otherwise called bondage, soul, subtle body, samsara, the mundane state of activity, mind, and so on. This formless and ghostless ego, i.e., it has no form of its own, comes into existence by grasping a body form. Having grasped a form, it endures, and having grasped a form, it waxes more by feeding upon forms. Leaving one form, it grasps another form. When sought for, it takes to flight. What a wonder it is! Thus should you know. Uladu Narpadu, verse 25. The ego can come into existence only by identifying with a form, a body, as I. It can exist only by clinging to that form, taking forms through the five senses. For its food to live upon, it will wax more and more. Leaving one form with which it had identified as I, it will catch another form as I. It will lose its existence and disappear only when it is sought for. What is it? Or who am I? This ego, which rises in the form of I am the body, is thus a formless, imaginary, and empty ghost-like appearance, having no real existence, says Bhagavan Sri Ramana. Presupposing the existence of a non-existent thing, and then wanting to get salvation for that imaginary I, you have to start and try to do so through the above-said 4 paths of yoga. When your sadhanas themselves become a means of giving life to the non-existent ego, how can they destroy it? To do any sadhana except self-enquiry, atma vichara, the existence of the mind jiva is indispensable. For how to perform those sadhanas without the mind? To try to destroy the ego by sadhanas other than self-enquiry is to be just like a thief turning himself into a policeman to catch the thief, who is none but himself. Only self-enquiry can reveal the truth that the ego, mind, or jiva has no existence whatsoever. So do not accept this ego, the truth of which you have not yet found out by scrutiny. Deny it by giving no importance to its existence. Root it out and burn it to extinction by attending to how or from what, whence it rises. Instead of doing so, if you accept it as a real entity, even before inquiring, and find out what it is, i.e., before finding out who am I, it itself will be a fetter to you and will create many non-existent obstacles, such as lust, anger, etc., for you, and will then involve you in the aforesaid unnecessary efforts to overcome them. Thus says Sri Bhagavan. Only if we first accept as self a thing which is not self, does a need arise for a yoga to make efforts from there to unite with another real thing. Wrongly accepting a thing in this manner before scrutinizing it is itself ignorance. That itself is bondage. Rather than first accepting a thing of which the truth is not properly known, bondage which is in fact non-existent, and then struggling to get rid of the miseries caused by it, would it not be wiser and more apt to inquire and find out, does it exist? What is it? Who am I? That thing? The mere inquiry, to whom are these defect, karmas, actions, vibhakti, lack of devotion, vayoga, disunion, and ajnana, ignorance, is itself karma, bhakti, yoga, and jnana. How? When thus inquired I is found to be non-existent, and hence these defects are also found to be ever non-existent. The truth is then revealed that we ever remain as the defectless self. Uladu Narpadu, Anubanham, verse 14. If we ask, to whom are these 4 defects, namely that of not performing nishkamya karmas, that of not loving God, vibhakti, that of being separated from God, viyoga, and that of not knowing God, ajnana? The answer will be, to me. If we then inquire, who is this I? That itself is truly doing the 4 yogas. Karma yoga, bhakti yoga, raja yoga, and jnana yoga. Because by thus inquiring who one is, this defective I will be found to be non-existent. When this I is thus found to be non-existent, these 4 defects will also be found to have been ever non-existent. Our real experience will then be that we are ever shining as the defectless self alone. When this state is attained by the inquiry, who am I? Who is then left there to practice the 4 yoga sadhanas, and why to do so? Hence the inquiry, who am I, is the essence of all yogas. It is the Maha-yoga, the greatest of all yogas. Bhagavan Sri Ramana starts his teaching, who am I? Taking self, the state of true existence, Satbhava, to be our basic knowledge. Therefore, he does not at all allow us to accept the non-existent ego, the sense of individuality, jiva bhava. But in other paths, that is, in yogas, instructions are given, taking as our basic knowledge the sense of individuality, jiva bhava, a false existence which we have accepted with our prior scrutiny. That is why in the Shastras the process is named union or yoga. If so, some may doubt thus: are all the Vedantic Shastras wrong? And have they cheated the aspirants? Can Shastric statements be false? Or are we to conclude that Bhagavan Sri Ramana has condemned the Shastras? No, it is not so. Neither do the Shastras tell lies, nor does Bhagavan Sri Ramana condemn the Shastras. The fact of the matter is this: the absolute truth, Paramartika Sastya, which is the very life of the Shastras, has been rendered as if lifeless in the course of time by the wrong explanation of mere bookworms, who have mastered only the letter, but have not understood the true import of the Shastras. The true import of the Shastras cannot be learnt, except from jnanis, that is, those who have had and live in the direct experience of reality. No one can understand the true spirit behind any of the Shastras merely by his command over language or by his keenness and superiority of intellect. We can clarify this point with 2 examples. First, let us take the Mahavakya, that thou art, tat tvam asi. We should note the difference between the decision of Sri Bhagavan and that of the learned Pandits with regard to what an aspirant, mumukshu, should do as soon as he hears these divine and significant words. Having mastered the Shastras, these scholars who lecture on them with their peculiar interpretations to laymen begin to do japa, to repeat, the Mahavakyas such as that thou art, tat tvam asi, I am Brahman, aham paramasmi, and I am he, soham. Or they begin to think, meditate, I am Brahman. They also instruct others to do japa and meditation in the same manner. In the place of the former thought, I am a man or jiva, they now have a different thought, I am Brahman. This is nothing but replacing one thought by another. It is not the thought-free state of self-abidance, nishta, not knowing the correct practice which is to be done as soon as the Mahavakyas are thus heard, repetition, japa of them or meditation, dhyana, upon them is performed. But being fully aware that such wrong practices would and could never bestow the experience of true knowledge, jnana, even though practiced for years together, Sri Bhagavan at once puts the aspirant on the right path by instructing him thus. Since the Shastras proclaim, "Thou art that which is called the Supreme," and since that itself always shines as self, for one to meditate, "I am that and not this," the body and so on, instead of knowing oneself, to the inquiry, "What am I?" and abiding as self, is indeed due to lack of strength of mind. Uladu Narpadu, verse 32. As soon as the Shastras declare, "Thou art that," turning his attention selfwards, "I am what? Who am I?" should be the immediate reaction of an aspirant. It is not meant that he should meditate, "I am not this body, I am that Brahman." The purpose of the Shastras in saying, "that thou art," is to make the aspirant turn his attention towards self. Who am I? On the other hand, by turning Mahavakyas, "I am that," "I am he," and "I am Brahman," into japa and meditation, not only is the very purpose of the Shastras defeated, but also the aspirants deprive themselves of the proper benefit they should have obtained from the Shastras. Do they not? When Sri Bhagavan directly takes the aspirant to self-attention, is he not truly fulfilling the objective of the Shastras, and thus revitalizing them? Can it then be said that he is contradicting them? It certainly cannot. Here is an apt story to illustrate this point. One evening, a young boy went for a stroll with his father. When dusk had almost set, he beheld a tree trunk from which the branches and leaves had been cut off. He was terrified and screamed, "Oh, father, there, see a ghost!" Though his father knew the truth that it was just the stem of a tree, he assured the boy, "Oh, that ghost, it cannot do you any harm. I am here and will see to it. Come on." So saying, he led the boy away. On hearing the encouraging words of his father, the boy took them to mean, "My father is stronger than the ghost, and that is why he says that it can do me no harm." This conclusion of the boy is similar to the understanding of the Pandits about the meaning of the Yoga and Vedanta Shastras. Next evening, while going for a stroll with his teacher along the same path, the boy exclaimed, "Sir, look, there's the ghost. We saw it yesterday also." The teacher pitied him for his ignorance and said, "That is not a ghost." But the boy persisted, "No, sir, my father also saw it yesterday. He even assured me that he would see to it that it could do me no harm. But, sir, you say it is not a ghost at all." Would the teacher yield so easily? He said, "Go near it and see for yourself. I will shine the flashlight on it. If it turns out to be a ghost, I too will see it." The Shastras are like the words of the father in the story. The father also knew well that it was not a ghost. Similarly, the great sages who gave these Shastras also knew well the absolute truth, Paramartika Satya, that nothing such as the ego, body, or world has ever come into existence at all. The father, knowing that his son was quite unfit to make a closer examination on account of his much frightened state at that time, talked to him as if he were also accepting the existence of the false ghost imagined by his son. Even while talking like that, he was not telling a lie. To allay quickly the fear of his son, he said, "The ghost cannot do you any harm." That was indeed the truth. However, what the teacher told him the next day was the absolute truth, Paramartika Satya. Although the teacher's statement that it was not a ghost seems to contradict the father's statement, does it not, in fact, lend more support to the objective of the father's statement that the ghost could do the boy no harm, by making him see for himself that it was, after all, only the stem of a tree? By thus fulfilling the father's objective, does not the statement of the teacher breathe new life into that of the father? Instead of understanding thus, if the boy were to conclude, either the teacher has condemned my father, or my father has told me an outright lie, it would be utterly wrong on his part. Similarly, Sri Bhagavan has neither condemned the Shastras nor shown them to be false, nor has the Shastras stated untruths. If any reader were to come to this mistaken conclusion about Sri Bhagavan, he would be just as much wrong as would have been the boy in our story. Secondly, in Kaivalya Navidnitam, which is a standard non-dualistic work, Jnana Shastra in Tamil, it is stated, for the jnani, the fruits of the accumulated past actions which are to bear fruit in future births, sanchita karma, are burnt up by the fire of knowledge, jnana. The good and bad fruits of the actions done in this birth, agamya karma, are nullified by their being taken up by those who praise him and blame him respectively, i.e., by those who do good or harm to him through thought, word, or deed. And only the remaining third karma, that portion of the past actions which are to give fruit in this present birth, prarabdha karma, is to be experienced by him for the duration of his body, and it will end only with the death of his body. But Sri Bhagavan gives his verdict. To say that sanchita and agamya will not adhere to a jnani, but that prarabdha does remain to be experienced by him, is only a superficial reply to the questions of others. Just as none of the wise will remain unwidowed when the husband dies, so also the three karmas will be extinguished when the doer, the ego, dies. Thus should you know. Uladu Narpadu, Anubanham, verse 33. It has been pointed out by Sri Bhagavan that the statement of the Jnana Shastras and the Prarabdha remains for a jnani is only a reply to the questions of others. Now to whom does Sri Bhagavan refer as others? Only to the ignorant, those who are in a similar state of delusion as the boy in our story, who, not being able to grasp that jnana itself is the jnani, he is not a human form. See the jnana, the bodiless, as one who has a body, as a body form, that is, as an individual. Such people will be repeatedly asking, how does the jnani walk? How does he talk? How does he work? And so on and so forth. And for them it is something new and incomprehensible how at all it is possible to have an existence other than I am the body identification. Therefore, referring to these people as others, Sri Bhagavan explains that only such a reply has to be given to them. However, to those mature aspirants, mumukshus, who came to him with the courage to know the final truth as it is, since they alone truly belong to him, Sri Bhagavan lays bare the truth, without concealing anything, in the second half of the verse. Just as none of the wives will remain unwidowed when the husband dies, so all the three karmas will be extinguished when the doer, the ego, dies. Thus should you know, if a man has 3 wives and dies, all the 3 wives will be widowed. None of them will be missed out. Similarly, as soon as the one who has done the karmas, i.e., the sense of doership, kartritva, dies in true knowledge, jnana, all the fruits of the 3 karmas come to an end, since the experiencer, i.e., the sense of experience-ship, bhoktritva, is no longer alive. How can it be said that Sri Bhagavan has criticized or contradicted Kaivalya Navanitam? Sri Bhagavan's statement is certainly not a condemnation, since in the first half of the verse he clearly explains the reason why it is so said in Kaivalya Navanitam. The one supreme thing, Paravastu, assuming the form of various Veda rishis, gave the Shastras to the world according to the development of the people and their power of understanding at that time. Later on, the same supreme thing appears in the form of various jnana gurus and makes clear, through so many new methods which will suit the intellectual development of the people in that particular age, its own supreme truth, which it had already revealed through the Shastras, but which had been twisted and rendered lifeless by people of perverted intellect who did not properly understand it. In this context, the reader may refer to the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4, verses 1 to 3. Reason does not contradict but fulfills. No sage has ever come to contradict. Jesus Christ meant the very same thing when he said, "I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill." Sermon on the Mount. The revolutionary teachings of Bhagavan Sri Ramana, who steer clear of all the roundabout routes in the Shastras and shows the aspirants the direct and easy path, will appear to be a condemnation only in the eyes of those pandits who are attracted and deluded by the darkness of the vast forest of the Shastras, and who never had the benefit of their study but suffer from mere scriptural fanaticism, and who use their learning only to show off their skill in intellectual acrobats on the platforms and to write commentaries in bombastic style on the Shastras in order to earn name and fame. But those sincere aspirants who want to have the real benefit of the Shastras will see the teachings of Bhagavan Sri Ramana as the crest jewel adorning the crown of the Shastras, imparting a new life and fresh glory to them. The difference between the mode of teaching of Bhagavan Sri Ramana and that of the Shastras lies in the fundamental outlook given to us as the base from which we are to follow their teachings. That is, whenever aspirants who were practicing sadhanas learned from the Shastras asked Bhagavan about their sadhanas, which they thought to be real tapas, Sri Bhagavan replied with the sole intention of changing the fundamental outlook given to them by the Shastras. Those mature disciples who had a sharp and clear intellect were able to grasp at once the intention of the Satguru and engage themselves in inquiring into their wrong outlook. I am the body, Jiva Bhava. Thus they became intensely still, since they no longer made efforts in the sadhanas they had been doing in the name of tapas, and since they stopped asking questions to clear their doubts about them. This stillness was indeed the peace which we often hear described as being the experience of many aspirants newly coming into the presence of Sri Bhagavan. However, only those earnest aspirants who made use of this stillness and dived deep within by attending to self more and more intensely made eternal peace their own. But those who failed to understand that Sri Bhagavan's intention was to change their fundamental outlook were repeatedly raising the same type of questions to clear their doubts about what they had learnt from the Shastras, which lent support to their wrong outlook. I am the body. Seeing the bewilderment of those who could not come to his path and taking pity on them, even Sri Bhagavan would on some occasions reply to their doubts in the Shastric terminology itself, as if, like the Shastras, he too were accepting the false sense I am the body as the base. Therefore, such replies can never be the direct teaching of Sri Bhagavan. If one has carefully studied the various books both in prose and poetry, such as Sri Ramana Gita, Talks with Sri Ramana Maharishi, Day by Day with Bhagavan, Maharishi's Gospel, and so on, in which some of the conversations of devotees with Sri Bhagavan were recorded, from the early days when it was found that he was not keeping silence and was talking with devotees till the very end of his life. It will now be clear why such questions were asked and why Sri Bhagavan gave such replies. Let us see an incident which will clearly show the difference between the tapas prescribed by the Shastras and based upon the fundamental outlook I am the body, Jiva Bhava, and the tapas based upon the fundamental outlook of pure existence, Sat Bhava, recommended by Sri Bhagavan in his teaching, Who Am I? Kavya Kanta Ganapati Shastri, who was the foremost poet in Sanskrit among the devotees of Sri Bhagavan, and who was good at the tapas of existing upon the least quantity of food, once told Sri Bhagavan, "It seems to me that just 3 rupees a month are sufficient for us to live." Quick came Sri Bhagavan's retort, "When even the body is not necessary for us to live, why then 3 rupees? We must clearly understand the implication underlying this conversation. When Ganapati Shastri remarked, "for us to live," he meant only for the body to live. It is thus clear that his fundamental outlook was, "the body is I." When Sri Bhagavan retorted, "for us to live," he meant for self to live. It is thus clear that his fundamental outlook was that the pure consciousness, which is devoid of the 5 shis, is I. From this conversation, cannot the reader clearly see what each of them experienced as the knowledge of his existence? Chapter 6. Who Am I is not Soham Bhavana. Before filling a tub of water, do we not carefully look for any holes and outlets and plug them? Otherwise, most of our efforts to fill it will be in vain. Similarly, before we start to explain the technique of self-enquiry, it is necessary to find out the many ways in which it should not be practiced, and to dismiss the various wrong ways in which it has already been understood and practiced up till now. There is a difference between the technique of the self-enquiry revealed by Sri Bhagavan and that of the self-enquiry which we have learnt from the Shastras all this time. For ages past, the Shastras have been declaring, "Who are you? You are not the body, prana, mind, intellect, ego, or the like. You are self, Atman. You are consciousness, which is self." However, they do not go beyond telling us, eliminate the 5 shis, which are non-self, as not I, not I, neti. They do not explain who is to eliminate or the practical method how to eliminate, nor do they give in a precise and direct manner the proper clues to eliminate the non-self. That is why even those who have made an extensive study of Vedanta are found to be devoid of the practical experience of jnana, which is the loss of the ego, the I am the body consciousness, the Atma Buddhi. This is not only the case with those who study the Shastras and yet are not given to practice, but it is also the case with those earnest seekers who are sincerely attempting to put into practice what they have learnt from the Shastras. Though they repeatedly struggle in their thwarted attempts, they are not able to achieve the direct experience of the non-dual knowledge. On the other hand, jnanis who are permanently established in the natural self-consciousness assert that experience of self is here, now, and ever attained. The reason why Sri Bhagavan and those of his disciples who came to him solely for the experience of self-knowledge rejoice and exclaim, "Ah, knowing self is the easiest thing. Indeed, it is the easiest," must be that on the path of self-enquiry, some new clue, which is refined and easy to put into practice, has been given by Sri Bhagavan. Let us see what this clue is. The body is not I. Who am I? I am he. Deham naham koham soham. This is the quintessence of the self-enquiry found in the Shastras, to facilitate which they lay down the following 4 practices, sadhanas. 1. Discrimination, viveka, between the eternal and the ephemeral. 2. Desirelessness, vairagya, towards the various enjoyments in this world and in any other world. 3. The 6 virtues of tranquility, sama, and so on. 4. Intense yearning for liberation, mumukshutva. Because an aspirant comes to know through the discrimination between the eternal and the ephemeral that liberation is the only eternal thing, nitya vastu, he gains intense yearning for liberation, and having thereby acquired desirelessness towards all other enjoyments, he puts forth his efforts in the practice of the 6 virtues of tranquility and so on. Therefore, in the 3rd sadhana, the 6 virtues, the Shastras give him all the aids they can for the attainment of self-knowledge. Thus, when he puts forth his efforts in this 3rd sadhana, is it not clear that he has already completed the 1st, 2nd, and 4th sadhanas, controlling the sense organs and the organs of action through desirelessness, vairagya, and trying to fix the wavering mind on Brahman, are the 2 essential points among the 6 items of the 3rd sadhana. But while practicing, what exactly does a ripe and tremendously earnest aspirant do? His main practice can only be to fight with desires for sense, objects, and to think about a 2nd or 3rd person thing which he thinks to be Brahman, the absolute reality. For this, the only aids given to him by the Shastras are the Mahavakyas, such as I am Brahman, Aham Brahmasmi, I am he, Soham, and thou art Tattvam Asi. When meditation bhavana upon the Mahavakyas is practiced, the efforts of the aspirant are merely flowing in the form of a thought. This I is that Brahman, towards a 2nd or 3rd person. This thought is only a mental activity, mano vritti, in these meditations. I am Brahman or I am that. What he feels as I is nothing but the mind, which he takes to be himself. Because he who now meditates is the first thought, which has risen only after sleep came to an end, while the Brahman on which he meditates is a third-person object, which can come into existence only after his rising. So long as the ego, the I, and the body consciousness lasts, when one hears the word Brahman, one can only take it to denote one of the second or third persons, and not any other thing, i.e., not the first person feeling. Because in the sentence, I am Brahman, since I is already there to denote the first person, the word Brahman can only be taken to mean either a second or third person. When closely scrutinized, meditations such as I am he or I am Brahman are thus found to be nothing but an activity of the mind diverging towards a second or third person. There is therefore a vast difference as between a mountain and a valley, between these meditations which are mental activities, and the self-attention taught by Bhagavan Sri Ramana, which is a stillness of mind. Let us see how. While practicing the meditation, I am Brahman, the first person feeling roused by the words I am, is at once disturbed by the word Brahman, and diverted into a second or third person feeling. Solely to avoid this trouble in his work, Who Am I? Bhagavan Sri Ramana has said, even if one incessantly thinks I, it will lead to that place, the state of Brahman. If while threading a needle the two strands of the thread remain apart, even the one strand which enters the eye of the needle will be pulled out by the other. Similarly, when one meditates I am Brahman, even the first person feeling roused by the words I am is disturbed, instead of being allowed to remain in self, abidance, Atma Nishta, and pulled outwards by the word Brahman. Since this word creates a second or third person feeling, the aspirant mistakes this subtle activity of his mind thus going on within him from the first person feeling to the second person feeling, and from the second person feeling to the first person feeling, to be self-enquiry, Atma Vichara. When on account of such a subtle activity the mind sometimes lies at rest in sheer exhaustion, the aspirant mistakes this quiescence of his mind, Manolaya, to be self-realization, Jnana Samadhi. If this were really self-realization, the I and the body identification could not revive when he wakes up. And unless the body identification were to revive, he could not resume the thread of the meditation, I am Brahman. But since the aspirant resumes meditating as soon as he wakes up, does it not prove that what he achieved through that meditation was a mere laya, a sleep-like rest? After waking up from a dream, one can in no way again identify the dream body as I. In the same manner, after awaking to self-conscious self-realization, the jnani will not meditate, I am Brahman, since the ego is known to be false. Hence, Sri Bhagavan fittingly asks, since we are forever that, why should we forever be meditating that we are that? Does a man meditate, I am a man? Uladu Narpadu, verse 36. Does a man come to know that he is a man only by meditating, I am a man? Certainly not. Thus, since the aspirant again starts meditating, I am Brahman, it is evident that the state in which he found himself temporarily was not self-realization, the real waking. It will be worthwhile to note in this context the following conversation between Sri Ramakrishna and Sri Tatapuri. When Sri Tatapuri said, this brass vessel will shine bright only if it is polished daily, so also only by meditating upon these bhavanas daily will our mind remain pure to reflect Brahman. Sri Ramakrishna remarked, "Why to polish if the vessel is gold?" Thus, the meditations I am He, I am Brahman, I am that, Soham, Aham Brahmasmi, Tat Aham, and the like, are nothing but activities of the minds, pravrittis. But for self-realization, this mind must be destroyed without leaving a trace. By engaging in such meditations, the mind will live for any number of ages because activity is the food on which and by which the mind lives. It is only the attention to second and third persons that nourishes the mind. Therefore, since the mind is not annihilated by the meditations such as I am He, it will be kept alive forever either by doing these meditations or by lapsing into quiescence, laya, whenever it is totally exhausted by such activities. Hence, because they do not bring about the annihilation of the mind, these meditations cannot be the self-enquiry taught by Sri Bhagavan, which destroys the mind once and for all. Other than this, meditating I am not this, I am that, may be in some way an aid, but it cannot itself be the inquiry. Uladu narpadu, verse 28. Thus asks Sri Bhagavan, how these meditations may be an aid but cannot themselves be the inquiry will be explained in the appropriate place at the end of this chapter. Sri Bhagavan does not take these meditations to be self-inquiry. Self-attention in the form who am I alone is the teaching of Sri Ramana. The method of inquiry of Sri Ramana is an attention intensely fixed on the first person. What is this I? Rather than meditating I am this or I am that, knowing well that any activity given to the mind in the form of an attention to the second and third persons, like japa, dhyana, etc., will not destroy it. And in order to fulfill the aim of the Mahavakyas, Sri Bhagavan breathes a new life into the Shastras by means of his teaching, Who am I? A revelation which was not disclosed before now through the Shastras and which is essential for an aspirant to be able to practice self-inquiry without losing his way, has now been added to the world of Shastras by Sri Bhagavan. What is this revelation? The mind is destroyed only when it turns towards the first person. Divine lights, divine sounds, heavens such as Kailas, visions of God in forms such as Shiva, the 6 yogic centers such as Muladhara imagined in the body, since these and all other similar objects of the senses are objects perceived by the subtle mind through the subtle 5 senses, they are nothing but second and third person knowledges, drishya or the seen, and none of them can be the first person knowledge, drik or the seer. Moreover, when the mind itself, which is an aggregate of thoughts, is a second person object perceived by us, what else can the objects perceived by it be other than second or third persons? Therefore, the attention of the aspirant should be focused only on self, which always shines, even when the mind is not, and should be kept there without being allowed to be diverted towards any second or third person object. To think of second and third persons is sheer foolishness, for by thinking of second and third persons, the mental activities, manovrittis, will wax. On the other hand, attending to the first person is equal to committing suicide, for only by inquiring into the first person will the ego itself die. Atma Vichara Patikam, verse 7. This is no ordinary clue. when aspirants, even those who, with intense desirelessness and a steady power of one-pointedness, while attending to any undertaking, have been struggling for countless ages through ever so many births and deaths, since not knowing the proper direction in which to make efforts, they have been attending to the useless second and third persons, are puzzled at not finding a solution. This clue of first-person attention given by Bhagavan Sri Ramana will surely be valued by them as priceless. Like a heap of diamonds put into the hands of a poor man, not only has Sri Bhagavan revealed this clue, but he has also given in his invaluable, appealing, simple, and small work, Who Am I?, the exact, practical process of self-enquiry, to help even beginners to fix their minds on self alone, without allowing it to stray towards second and third persons. This process will be found well explained in the following chapters. A treasure, though hidden under the floor of our own house, is as if non-existent for us until we come to know about it, dig it out, and enjoy it, just like the herb that was discovered by the doctor in the patient's own garden. If someone makes us aware of the existence of the treasure and enables us to dig it out and to enjoy it, then he is truly the one who has given it to us anew. In fact, it is he alone who has made us rich. Before that, we were certainly poor. However, there are some among us who have not been able to gain the experience of self in spite of having read about self-enquiry in the Shastras, yet who, not knowing the invaluable help, the greatness, and the novelty of the technique of self-enquiry taught by Sri Bhagavan, ask superficially, self-enquiry is already mentioned in the Shastras. What new discovery has been made by Sri Bhagavan? This is similar to the poor man's saying, was not this treasure already there in my own house? Though he did not know about it and thus could not dig it out and enjoy it. The reason why we say it is similar to the statement of the poor man is that had he gained that immense treasure, known its value, and experienced its joy, he would no longer be a poor man, and hence he would not have spoken so belittling about his friend's invaluable help. Only those pandits who have mastered the mere letter of the ancient Shastras, but have never experienced even a fringe of the bliss of self through the self-enquiry taught there, can speak in such a way, since they do not know the unique greatness of the clue discovered and given to the world by Sri Ramana, the Satguru, for following the path of self-enquiry. If they had found the correct method of practicing self-enquiry by studying the Shastras for all these years, why then should they still be struggling and not obtaining the experience of self? In striking contrast to this, all those who have known the reality through the great help of the clue given by Sri Bhagavan were almost ignorant of the ancient Shastras. The consciousness, I am, when felt along with an adjunct, upadi, as I am so-and-so, becomes a thought. Of all thoughts, this thought is the first. But the consciousness which shines alone as I, without any adjunct, is self, Atman, or the absolute, Brahman. This is not a thought. It is our being. That is our true existence. Therefore, the purpose of Mahavakya, I am Brahman, taught by the Shastras, is to give us a prior information about the final experience, that Brahman is our pure existence, and not to convert Brahman into one of our thoughts. Thus, I am Brahman is only a prior intimation of our true state, which we are yet to reach. Can our existence, which is beyond thought, be reached by thought? since it cannot be thought of to put an end to the rising of the I, thought through the inquiry, who am I, i.e. through self-attention and to abide, as what remains after, is the true implementation of Mahavakya, I am Brahman. Since the reality I exists within, beyond thought, who can and how to meditate upon that reality which is called the heart? To abide in the heart as it is, that is without thought, is truly meditating upon it. I, thus, should you know, Uladu Narpadu, Benedictory verse 1. Until one gains the true experience of Brahman, Brahman Bhava, in whatever way one may meditate on Brahman, it will only be a thought about a second or third person. But if one simply meditates, I, since it is the first person attention, the I thought which has thus started to meditate, will drown in its own source and lose its form and separate existence, just like the stick used for stirring the funeral pyre, and like the reflection of the sun directed from a mirror towards the sun itself. Thus, if one takes to meditating, I am Shiva, Sivoham, or I am he, Soham, and so on, the ego will wax and grow strong. Whereas if one attends to self, who am I, the ego will die. That is why Bhagavan Sri Ramana did not teach I am he, Soham, as practice, sadhana. If some particulars about a town which we want to reach have been given to us beforehand, they will be a good aid. Similarly, the prior information given to us by Mahavakya, such as I am Brahman, that our final reality is Brahman, may be a good aid. But can it be the practice, the inquiry itself? No, it cannot. How? Studying the particulars about the town, reading them repeatedly to learn them by heart, and meditating upon them, can never be the journey to that place. The same is the case with the Mahavakyas. This is exactly what Sri Bhagavan meant when he wrote, meditating, I am not this, I am that, may be in some way an aid, but it cannot itself be the inquiry. Uladu Narpadu, verse 29. And meditating we are that may be good aid for reminding us to abide as self. Uladu Narpadu, verse 36. Therefore the path of inquiry, who am I, is not the meditation upon the Mahavakyas such as I am he. We often hear about some lecturers who neither have had the good fortune of being taught by the gracious glance of Sri Bhagavan's eyes, those two flames of jnana which easily reveal this truth, nor have the willingness to scrutinize thoroughly his teachings, but who, after reading Upadesa Saram, and taking only the latter part of the 8th verse, I am he, is better than all other meditations, start propagating that Bhagavan Ramana also teaches only the meditation I am he. It is therefore necessary to scrutinize this point a little deeper. The Tamil work Upadesa Undiyar is the original form which the Sanskrit Upadesa Saram was translated. The correct meaning of the 8th verse will become clear if we know what context and with what purpose Sri Bhagavan composed Upadesa Undiyar. Sri Muruganar, the wholehearted disciple of Sri Bhagavan and a great Tamil poet, while writing Sri Ramana Sannidhi Murai, in which he describes the play of Lord Shiva with his devotees, was narrating in a meter called Unhiyar the story of the dwellers in the Daruka forest in ancient days, who were performing ritualistic practices and who, on account of their deceitful egoism, had become immensely conceited, feeling that there is no God except kamya karmas. Thus, Sri Muruganar came to the point where Lord Shiva gives them instructions, upadesa, to correct them and to show them the right path. He then realized that Bhagavan Sri Ramana, who is Arunachala Shiva himself, was the only proper authority to impart the spiritual advice of Lord Shiva, and therefore requested him to complete the story by writing the instructions and the remaining 30 verses allotted in the work. Hence, in continuation of the story, Bhagavan Ramana started to compose Upadesa Unhiyar, the instructions given by Lord Shiva to the dwellers in the Daruka forest in those days. In the first verses, actions performed with desire, kamya karmas, are condemned. From verses 3 to 16, 13 verses in all, Sri Bhagavan has summed up all that has been said up until now in the Shastras about the 3 paths: Nishkamya Karma, Bhakti, and Raja Yoga. Within these 15 verses, the path of knowledge, Jnana Marga, is not at all mentioned by Sri Bhagavan. After giving instructions about puja and japa from verses 3 to 6, Sri Bhagavan describes the ancient methods of meditation in their order of priority in verses 7 and 8. And it is only in this context that it is said, in the 8th verse, "To meditate I am He is better than meditating upon Him, God, as an other." Because Sri Bhagavan was requested to recount the essence of the instructions that Lord Shiva gave in ancient days to the dwellers in the Daruka forest, it became necessary for him to summarize the ancient paths also. Therefore, verses 3 through 15, which are the teachings of Lord Shiva, should not be taken to be the teachings based upon the direct experience of Sri Bhagavan. Self-enquiry alone is the direct teaching of Sri Bhagavan. Some may ask, all right, the meditation I am He may not be the actual teaching of Sri Bhagavan, but does not the 9th verse, by the strength of such meditation remaining in one's true existence, which is beyond the range of meditation, is the very nature of supreme devotion, imply that liberation, which is the supreme devotion, can be attained by the strength of such meditation? Now let us see what, in the course of an aspirant's practice, the strength of such meditation is, and what changes take place in him through that strength. Throughout the time the aspirant was practicing the ancient methods described in verses 3 to 7, such as puja, meditation, and so on, his mind was imagining God to be a second or third person object. The reason why the meditation I am He was prescribed was to remove this ignorance and to help the aspirant gain full faith in the words of this Mahavakya, and thereby to give him the firm conviction God is indeed the reality of the first person. The strength of such conviction is the strength of meditation, bhava-bala, referred to in verse 9. However, why take this roundabout path to gain the conviction that God, or Brahman, is the reality of the first person? Since the ritualists in the Daruka forest were stranded on a dead-end route, they had to be led through such a roundabout path by Lord Shiva. But as soon as we hear the instruction of Sri Bhagavan in verse 14 of Uladu Narpadu, only if the first person exists will the second and third persons exist, why not we at once be convinced the second and third persons live only because of the root, the first person, and turn directly towards self? In order to bring back ultimately those aspirants who do not come to his path but direct their efforts towards second and third persons, Sri Bhagavan recommended this as the best of all the ancient methods of meditation, since as a prior information, it acts as an aid for the aspirants to turn that attention towards the first person. Suppose the owner of the cow which is tied in the other man's shed comes many times to pet it and feed it, thus making it familiar and acquainted with him. The cow will develop the conviction that he is its master. Then, after it has gained the strength of conviction, bhava-bala, that he is its master, when he brings it to his own shed, it will agree to stay there only because of its prior familiarity with him. The simile of the wasp and the grub mentioned in the Shastras is meant only to illustrate the process by which the aspirant gains this strength of conviction during his practice. It should not be taken to mean that the individual soul becomes Brahman through thinking, because the state of Brahman is not a thing to be newly created from some other thing, as a wasp is created from a grub. It is our natural state, undergoing no change. This existence, i.e. Brahman, thy feet, O Ramana, is not a thing to go and unite with another thing, not a thing to become another thing, not a thing to be bored of, not a thing to be destroyed, not a thing to rise and set on any account. Sri Ramana Sahasram, verse 233. Therefore, would it be in accordance with the eternal nature of the perfect state of Brahman to say that something can newly become that? Even the contention held that there is duality during practice and non-duality after attainment is not true. Uladu Narpadu, verse 37. After the conviction, my true existence consciousness is God or Brahman, has been well stabilized in an aspirant through the strength of such meditation, at an opportune moment the knowledge, do I not always exist? Why then should I meditate in order to exist? Will flash, and thus his attention will be drawn back all of a sudden and fixed on his existence consciousness. This self-attention is exactly the technique of self-enquiry, since through this self-attention the meditation, I am Brahman, has now become unnecessary. The aspirant remains in his true existence. I am, Aham Asmi, which is the state of thought-free consciousness. This is what is mentioned in verse 9. At any rate, what has to take place finally in the aspirant is self-attention, which is the self-inquiry taught by Sri Bhagavan. This love towards self, Swatma Bhakti, is the very nature of supreme devotion, Parabhakti Tattva, as mentioned in verse 9, and that is liberation. Then from verse 16 to 29, Sri Bhagavan expounds the path of knowledge. Even here a subtle difference should be noted between the way of teaching of the Shastras and that of Sri Bhagavan. First, in verses 16 to 20, Sri Bhagavan explains clearly the method of doing the inquiry, who am I, attending to self. Then, after giving us the understanding in verse 21 that the real thing denoted by the word I is self itself, he asserts his verdict that since the truth of I is self, the body, prana mind, intellect, and the darkness of ignorance, all these 5 shis, being insentient, jada, and non-existent, asat, are not I, that which exists, sat, upadesa unhiyar, verse 22. In ancient Shastras, the process of self-inquiry is described as negating the 5 shis as not I, neti, neti. However, aspirants struggle not knowing how to do this. That is why Sri Bhagavan first gives us in verses 16 to 20 the technique of attending to self, which is the means to know what I really is. Then he points out in verse 22 that negating the 5 Cs is the outcome of knowing the real I. He thus implies that attending to I, self, is itself the method of negating the 5 Cs, the non-self. Hence, in Upadesa Unhiyar, Sri Bhagavan has amended the path of knowledge, Jnana Marga, by rearranging the back-to-front process described in ancient Shastras into a new and practical order. That is, that which was given as the practice, neti-neti, is now pointed out to be the result, I. Thus, from verse 16 to 29, Sri Bhagavan teaches that the inquiry, who am I, is the correct path of knowledge, and concludes Upadesa Uniyar by declaring in verse 30 that the only right tapas is to know and remain in self, and not anything else.